Sorry, my camera just fell over completely.
Good morning and welcome to Powertranz live show where we cover all things e-commerce in the Caribbean. Our guests join us from all over the world and generously share their expertise, knowledge, and insight into the digital world and how we operate within it. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and if you're joining us from YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and follow to continue seeing content that will help you grow your online business. Today, we're discussing AI versus fraud, the battle for the future of payments in the Caribbean. And we're joined by Eldred Garcia. He's the Senior Vice President in Business and Partner Development at Powertranz. Hi, Eldred. Can you hear us?
Yes. Good morning, Pauline. How you doing?
Great. You sound great. So we're going to have a fantastic show. And for the first time, we have Ryan. He is joining us from Kount, an Equifax Company. He is the Partner Business Manager at Kount. So let's bring him in. I think we have him as well. Hi, can you hear us?
Loud and clear.
Okay, so Ryan, do me a huge favor because we have 60 minutes of this and I don't want to pronounce your last name incorrectly. Can you give it to me live so I do not mess this up on behalf of
Yes.
you and your ancestors?
I appreciate it. Yes. My name is Ryan Geraghty.
Geraghty.
Hold on.
Okay.
Irish spelling. Who knows?
Okay, fantastic. All right, Ryan Geraghty. So let's get straight into it because people think 60 minutes is a long time, but this AI conversation is trending and fraud has always been around. It's just evolved. So let's start with Ryan. How is Kount's advanced AI using machine learning to identify and block emerging fraud patterns with rule-based systems in the Caribbean, which is usually typically missed because I'm gonna be honest, representing all the Caribbean, this technology thing is still new. So give us some insight.
Yeah. So I think the thing about fraud really it's seen as simple by a lot of people, but the trick to that simplicity means adding friction. What we get to do with our AI and machine learning is inject trust without injecting a lot of friction. So specifically, when we're talking about how, if we look at rules-based systems, which are kind of they're prevalent. They're kind of the entry point, I would say, to trying to beat fraud. Is that with our machine learning and our global identity trust network? That's what we call our reach across everybody we work with, global banks, local merchants, everything, all that transaction data coming through is analyzed in real time. Um, so where you have static systems just with set rules, that's something that can screen out some very rudimentary fraud. Most fraud these days is pretty sophisticated, and so Counts AI is leveraging that real-time data to see real fraud signals, and help our merchants and partners be able to kind of clean that out in real time as it goes. Example would be seeing if we see transactions happening over Barclays network that are fraudulent, they give us certain specific fraud signals. We can use that if they try to use the same card or the same device somewhere down in Jamaica. We're going to be able to know this is a bad actor. We don't want to proceed with them.
Thank you so much for that, Ryan. And you spoke about sophistication, so I want to head over to Eldred when I speak about sophistication.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, as a Powertrans client, you're trying to navigate all these different things. How does one embed real-time risk assessment, especially when we look at data on these live shows, we're seeing a lot of people watching our live shows on mobile. Mobile has become part of our lives. So when it comes to a security model, how can we be proactive in this space?
Well, Pauline, when you talk about advanced fraud prevention. We have evolved as a market, right? So the Caribbean and Central America, where our markets reside, has evolved from a fraud prevention perspective. Before we had advanced AI fraud platforms like Kount, we had other tools that weren't as sophisticated, and honestly, they weren't really used for fraud prevention. They were used for authentication. So we may have heard of 3D Secure, and 3D Secure is actually an authentication tool. It's not a fraud prevention tool. However, when you don't have much else to use, you use whatever you have in order to try to prevent fraud. Now, the 3D Secure as an authentication tool, what it's trying to do is to validate that the person who's doing the transaction is who they are. And there's an authentication that occurs, but sometimes that creates a little bit of friction in the transaction. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is identify the risk associated with a transaction without creating that risk and impacting the customer experience. Now, what we've done now that we do have advanced fraud prevention tools available to us, like Kount, is that we use the fraud prevention in conjunction with the authentication, and we can determine the level of risk of a transaction, and then include authentication when it's necessary. Now, what we do is we get that fraud prevention and we leverage that in essentially all our solutions that are using a card not present transaction. So you have a lot of data that's occurring. You embed that data analysis in all the different channels. So you have stuff like the device fingerprinting attributes to make sure that device has never been seen doing fraudulent transaction. You have velocity checks to make sure that the amount of transactions that are occurring are within a normal within a normal range. You have IP geolocation, is the person who's doing the transaction transacting in an area that is where they say they are versus somewhere around the globe. So we can now embed that in mobile transactions, mobile acceptance. You can do that now at table transactions. You can do it in unattended devices like kiosks. So what we've done is that we've included this advanced AI fraud prevention solution essentially in every single channel that we do. And that allows us to analyze the transaction, determine the level of risk of the transaction, and then proactively either stop or allow the transaction to happen. So every solution that we have is leveraging that advanced artificial intelligence and that large language machine learning capability from Kount.
All right, thank you so much for that, Eldred. AI is definitely topical, artificial intelligence, and that's one of the reasons we're having this live show today. So we're going to tap into Ryan's technical educational curriculum background and ask, how does AI actually help in this grand scheme of things when it comes to our title, which is AI versus fraud? Can you give us a little insight there?
Yeah, so I think there's a few terms that go around with AI. There's machine learning. Um, I think specifically with us, we have two types of machine learning, and the one of them I think is more familiar to how people imagine AI, and that's the this unsupervised machine learning. We don't need to get too technical here, but really it's more of educated instinct, if you could imagine kind of a system with instinct. Because we've been, I mean, so Count, before the Equifax acquisition, way back, we invented fraud prevention, because we were one of the early AI adopters and kind of creators. So we've been learning this whole time, since 2007, I believe, and getting the smarter as fraud gets more sophisticated. Our machine learning, our AI models get more sophisticated and can kind of preempt and see these signals as they're happening to create a trustworthy customer journey, um, faster without any kind of interruption. Um, and genuinely, it's becomes this kind of smart, um, almost coworker presence to keep and protect revenue for merchants.
It's so interesting. As you're talking, Ryan, I have this scene of Terminator in my head, machine learning, which a lot of us have an association with. It's not necessarily real, but growing up as a millennial, you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, Skynet.
He's coming, and I think it may be possibly the reason, as much as a lot of us would want to admit it, that technical adoption in this e-commerce space is a little harder for us to accept than usual. So when it comes to return on investment for Caribbean merchants, Eldred, can you share some insight on what you're seeing?
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting with regards to return on investment. So typically, what we have seen is that fraudsters have a number of different ways to do fraud, right? So before, we had talked about, one person in their basement doing some transactions and stealing some cards and doing fraudulent activity. That has evolved since then, and then you have rogue nations where they have funding from government agencies that and an army of people with C-level, if you will, management overseeing fraudulent business. But now with the development of AI, it's almost done a full circle with an individual being able to go to the darknet, buying some fraudulent software generated by AI and being able to launch attacks. What we've seen is that, like I posted earlier, is AI friend or foe? What we've seen is that we need to now leverage artificial intelligence in order to fight artificial intelligence fraud. There is no way that a human being can keep up with the speed that AI is creating fraudulent transaction. Having said that, when you launch an AI robust artificially intelligence driven fraud prevention solution, you get immediate results. And when you talk about immediate results, it equals to immediate return on investments. It happens not only in the reduction of fraud, but the increase of transactions. We can very accurately identify good transactions. And that's key because we can let the good transactions go through the system, increasing revenue. And that not only adds to the ROI by allowing good transactions through, reducing fraudulent transaction, and also reducing chargebacks. So overall, what we've seen, a good implementation of AI driven fraud prevention can have an ROI within the first 90 days of implementing. That's quite significant because it pays itself back immediately.
Such great insight for all of us to learn, because as we're navigating this space and learning, it's so interesting to learn how we can have technology to help us. So we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be discussing fraud losses, which is not something anybody wants to hear, but it's something we have to discuss, as well as driving operational cost savings. So just like Arnold Schwarzenegger said, I'll be right back. And welcome back to the Powertranz show, where we cover all things e-commerce in the Caribbean. Our guests join us from all over the world and generously share their expertise, knowledge, and insight into the digital world and how we operate within it. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and if you're joining us from LinkedIn, like Khalil and Lisa, thank you so much for always tuning in to what we have to share at this Powertranz live show. Don't forget to like and follow our page to continue seeing content that will help you grow your business online. Today, we're discussing AI versus fraud, the battle for the future of payments in the Caribbean. And we're joined by Eldred Garcia. He is joining us from Powertranz, as well as Ryan Geraghty. He is the Partner Business Manager at Kount and Equifax Company. Let's bring them back in. So, not to worry if you miss any of what we had to say. This live show will be available on YouTube and LinkedIn on replay, as well as we will throw in the QR code. I think it's that way on your screen where you could scan and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, just before the break, we were discussing, the ROI for Caribbean merchants, and it's super important to learn what's happening internationally as well as regionally. So we want to find out about how these solutions can reduce fraud losses, because in this AI space, everyone's clicking it, everyone's seeing these articles, but truly understanding how this affects us in the e-commerce space, I would like Ryan to share some insight on that, please. Can you let us know from a global perspective?
A global perspective about how fraud is impacting merchants.
When it comes to integrating the AI solutions, how is this reducing the fraud losses?
Oh, sure. So, I mean, fraud is a tricky thing. A lot of conversations I have, actually, people will say like, "Well, we don't have a fraud problem," and the sad fact is that most people really do and are unaware. Especially, I think people sometimes think, "Well, my business is small. I'm a small merchant. We don't see any fraud." I see a lot of fraud. Growing specifically against small merchants, because the first line of fraud, really the most basic fraud attack that people will see, is something called card testing. Card testing is something where, like Eldred alluded to, they can go to the black market or the dark web and they can buy 10,000 stolen credit card numbers, and all they really want to do is do little test transactions, especially on a small merchant where maybe they have a free trial or a small cost of goods that they're ordering, or something quick. They're going to run these transactions through these small businesses just to find out if the credit card even works. What that's going to end up doing is, I've seen merchants get their gateway will shut them off. They get a bunch of fees stacked up just on the front end. Downstream, you have chargebacks that start pouring in, and chargebacks have multi levels of fees and hassle. So what people end up doing when they first see maybe a small little testing attack is then they start dedicating human resources, and now you have people that were growing a business dedicated to something that generally they won't be experts in, doing manual review of each transaction. And so you have man hours, you have money lost. Sometimes, pardon me, you'll have stolen goods if they ordered something smaller, purchased something of a low value. You have goods out the door. It comes from all angles. Fraud tends to not just cost money up front on the attack. It's something that hits your bottom line down the road. It can have reputational damage. I've seen it be really detrimental to good growing business owners.
I chuckled when you said people say that they don't have fraud in their business, because I'm going to take it back a little broader, in the sense of, I was checking my operating system for my emails on Friday and found out that within less than an hour, there were about, I don't know, 50 attempts to basically hack my email, which is something that's extremely important for different parts of my business. And it felt a little scary. Although it wasn't successful, it is something that I think small businesses aren't really processing very well, because it is a very uncomfortable position to be in. And we're going to take it back from a regional perspective, Eldred, because Ryan spoke about SMEs thinking they're not really affected. So give us some insight in the Caribbean space.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that, Pauline? You broke up a little bit.
So when it comes to the global perspective, a lot of people think that fraud and AI is not affecting them because they're SMEs. Can you give us some regional take on that? Because you are the one connecting with a lot of these small businesses in the Caribbean.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ryan mentioned a couple of things that are quite important. So fraud will always go to the area of least resistance. So just think about a fraudster trying to break into a house in a neighborhood. He walks up to a house and it has security bars and alarm systems and a dog and cameras, and the other one has nothing. The door's open and it's readily accessible. So again, fraudsters will go to the area of least resistance, and that house that's not protected will be the easiest target, because they really want to get in and get out and not get not get caught. And this is what's happening in the Caribbean, right? So you have advanced fraud prevention solutions that are available worldwide, and these are being implemented. Not today. They've been implemented for a long time. And what's happening is fraud doesn't go on vacation. It doesn't go away. What basically happens is it's like squeezing a balloon, right? You squeeze it from one end, it pops up somewhere else. And where it's popping up is in the Caribbean. Why? Because we haven't implemented the advanced fraud prevention solutions that are out there on a global scale. We have been systematically going through our market and implementing these fraud prevention solutions with Kount, with a lot of our banking partners. And what it has done is absolutely reduced fraud. It has not only reduced fraud, it has caused fraud to adjust. Fraud just basically adjusts. You put certain things in place and it'll adjust, and it'll try to find areas of least resistance where the tools aren't located. But what it has done now is those banks that have implemented these advanced fraud prevention solutions, the fraud has shifted typically from one bank to another in a specific market, from one market to another, always looking for those that haven't or don't have any tools. Not only do they move within merchants inside a bank's merchant acquiring portfolio, but they move from bank to bank because they talk. This community of fraudsters does a much better job as an organization sharing information. So they tell each other, hey, guess what? This bank doesn't have a fraud prevention solution. This bank doesn't have a way to mitigate fraud or protect its merchants, and the fraud just shifts. So what we're seeing right now, as we deploy these advanced fraud prevention solutions across our different markets, across our different banks and merchants, the fraud is currently shifting. And we've been very vocal. We've been, Ryan, myself, and others have been talking about, hey, fraud is coming. As we deploy new and advanced technologies, we've always told people, as you deploy new technologies, AI is accessible to everybody, the good and the bad. And as we deploy new technologies and we connect everybody, we're connecting the good and the bad, unfortunately. And if you don't deploy mitigating tools to address these fraud risks, what's going to happen is fraudsters are going to have access. Fraudsters are going to attack areas of least resistance. So if there's an action item, and all of this is pay attention. Yes, deploy new technologies. You want to generate more revenue, but do it in a smart and protective way. Deploy equally a fraud prevention tool to make sure that all the new technologies that you're deploying are secure.
Thank you so much for that, Eldred. It's such important information that all of us have to learn and understand, because as small business owners or owners in general, we have to evolve with the technologies. I want to shout out to Calvin. He is joining us from LinkedIn, as well as Cami. If you have any questions, don't forget to slide into the comments and let us know. I will ask questions because this affects me, so I'm going to learn, guys. But you also can let us know what you want to learn more about with your questions. So earlier, Ryan spoke about chargebacks. Can you just, for the most layman term possible, for folks like me, explain to us, Ryan, what is a chargeback?
Sure. I mean, that's now let's see. In the fraud sense, usually what it is okay. If I'm a criminal and I have Eldred's identity information. I stole his credit cards and these sort of things because I want to go have a party, and I start, I book a trip. I do some fun stuff. I spend a bunch of Eldred's money. When he sees his return and he knows that he hasn't stopped working for the last, I don't know, 3 months is usually how about the streak Elder goes by. He's gonna know he didn't do any of this fun stuff. So he's gonna call his credit card. He's gonna say, "Hey, I didn't make these payments. This isn't me. I'm gonna charge that back," saying, "Don't pay that." And so what that does is that then, let's say it's American Express or Visa, they're going to go and put that liability on the merchant to say, hey, prove that Eldred was the one who went partying with his credit card, because we're saying that he didn't. Without some major kind of fight, most merchants end up losing these deals and just lose that revenue. They also get fined, and they can have increased rates from their processors, just from having their chargeback rate increase. That can get as far as being put into, I call it Visa jail, but it's the Visa monitoring program. It's difficult to get out of that program, and I've seen it suffocate a small business once you have too many chargebacks too consistently, and that number's low, especially with the new vamp ratios coming out. Um, it's something to be more concerned with. Oftentimes when we have people coming in, the term we use here at Equifax is we have people coming in with their hair on fire, because they have a small business, they love doing what they're doing, and all of a sudden they have this new problem that's emerged, this fraud that is wrecking everything. When we come in, even sometimes saying, okay, we're working with Kount, we have them implemented, is enough for Visa to say, oh, okay, well, we know immediately chargebacks are going to drop significantly, and we can allow you to process and continue forward.
Wow, that sounds so scary and makes me understand even more why some small businesses just refuse to actually have credit card payments, because it feels frustrating to have to go through this other step. But what advice would you give, Eldred, for the Caribbean merchants watching this, thinking, okay, this is just another problem I have to add to my already filled plate?
Well, Pauline, the reality is, when you're doing e-commerce, you have a wealth of opportunity to grow business and generate revenue. Because there's risk associated with doing business online does not mean you should not do business online, and forego all the opportunities to grow your business. So we have mitigating tools, right? So it's like going to play football and not wearing any equipment. You're going to get injured. The right way is not to play football, is to wear the proper equipment. And here is the same thing. We have mitigating tools like 3D Secure. 3D Secure is an authentication tool that will do a liability shift away from the merchant to protect the merchant from chargebacks. Now, remember, this is a tool to authenticate. Gives the merchant the ability to authenticate the card holder that's doing the transaction, and shift the liability of that chargeback away from the merchant to back to the issuer. However, part of that liability shift protection is to have a fraud prevention tool to demonstrate that you're doing everything possible to keep fraud under control. The fraud tool, what it does is that it analyzes a ton of data. You're talking about hundreds of data points within a transaction in a millisecond, so a blink of an eye. It will tell you the level of risk of a transaction. It will tell you, hey, these transactions are good. You don't need to do anything else. Allow it to come through the system without creating friction, so the customer has a good experience and returns tomorrow for another transaction. If the level of risk associated with that transaction after the analysis is a little bit elevated, then you can implement another layer of security, which is 3D Secure, which we call smart routing, is adding another layer of security for that merchant to give them the protection, to give them that comfort in knowing that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and proceed. I know I'm protected. Liability has been shifted. So under no circumstances should a business who's trying to grow say, wow, I'm not going to get into this because there's associated risk. Well, guess what? Everything that has a reward has a risk associated. What you need to do is learn how to mitigate it. We have those tools in order to mitigate so you can grow your business in a secure way.
Thank you so much, Eldred. And I think as I guess layman as this sounds, it's like when we're shifting over from horses to cars, right? It's not like you have a choice. It is gonna happen if you want to join or not. So I think these live shows are a fantastic way for us to learn how to navigate this space. All right, so we're gonna be on a quick break, but when we come back, I was searching online and realized that in the Caribbean, there's a search within Google to figure out what friendly fraud is. So we're gonna throw these questions at our guests and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Powertranz live show. We cover all things e-commerce with guests joining us from all over the world, sharing their knowledge on all things digital. If you're joining us today from LinkedIn, like David, I think David had some initial issues, David Bishops from LinkedIn, but he joined us from YouTube as well. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button so you could continue seeing content that'll help you manage your online business. Today, we're discussing AI versus fraud, the battle for the future of payments in the Caribbean. And we're joined by Eldred and Ryan. So we have I think we have like about 29 more minutes to go. I have some questions, but before I get into it, let's bring our guest in and let's head over to Anjani Singh from LinkedIn. I think we're gonna direct this question to Eldred. What about credit unions in the Caribbean? How prevalent is fraud in that sector?
Well, it's when we're talking about merchant doing business. There's basically two environments. Right? We're talking about card not present, and that includes not only traditional e-commerce, going to a website, but any place that a transaction where the card is not physically present. So whether it is somebody manually entering a card because either the chip or the magnetic stripe wasn't working and they have to manually enter the transaction wasn't captured, or it could be something on a website or a mobile transaction. But typically when the card is not present, it's subject to some kinds of chargebacks or fraud that occur. This is not restricted to traditional banks versus credit unions. We're talking about merchant acquiring service. So if you're a merchant and you go to a financial institutions and say, hey, I have a business, I want to open an account and I want to accept credit cards. If they have a merchant acquiring business, what you're going to do is you're going to register your merchant within the bank. The bank is going to assign you a merchant ID. It's going to do some underwriting process to make sure that you're a legitimate business and you can accept credit cards. It's going to assign you a merchant ID, and then you're going to get that merchant ID and you're going to be able to start now accepting credit cards. Typically what you do, you come to Powertranz, we take that credentials that they've given you, we board you into our systems, and now you can start taking credit cards, whether it's in a virtual environment like an e-commerce or a website or a mobile phone like the mobile QR, or in a physical environment where you have a storefront and somebody's walking in and making a payment. Fraud doesn't say, hey, we're not going to bother the credit unions, we're not going to bother these types of merchants or these types of banks. Fraud is just going to go to the area of least resistance. So there is no necessary fraud levels that differentiate between one financial institution and the other than, does this financial institution have the fraud prevention tools necessary to protect its merchants? Fraudsters no. And fraudsters, what they'll do is go attack those that don't. So from that perspective, it's not necessarily whether it's a traditional financial institutions or a credit union. It's more whether the institution has the tools to protect its merchants. And I can tell you, as we deploy these advanced fraud prevention tools, there's more merchants being protected. There's more financial institutions being protected, but we're still way behind the curve. And this is important. It's important for us as a payments community, and merchants as part of that ecosystem to verbally communicate to your financial institutions that you need to provide that protection in order for me to be able to grow my business in a healthy way.
Thanks for your question, Anjani, and for your response, Eldred. I saw Ryan shaking his head vigorously in agreement. Would you like to add to the conversation from a global perspective?
I honestly, I very much do, but it's more in praise of Powertranz and Eldred specifically. Um, the way they've empowered financial institutions as well as merchants is unique, right? I say that because well, I mean, we work with a lot of different partners and gateways and platforms and processors all over the world. Powertrains is the only one doing um, working directly with regional financial institutions, regional banks and credit unions, as well as direct merchants to be able to give this type of protection to the entire region. Um, it's unique, and I think it's proved very uh, productive, very fruitful in bringing trust into the Caribbean in a much larger scale. So I just want to give a little. I'm shaking my head because I love hearing Eldred talk about fraud with his background and his knowledge with working with other large financial institutions previously. Um, I think over the last few years working together, we've really come to understand how fraud is creeping in aggressively in the Caribbean, and I just give him some flowers about how he's approaching it. I think it's been really impactful.
Well, June, we need to take that video, just that part there, and just add that to your LinkedIn and your resume, and just make sure and have that quotation, right? So, where
Thank
shout
you,
out to Kamla, who's joining us from LinkedIn. Great topic. So clearly, this is something that we want to continue to have with this live show because there's so much information out there, and we really want to look at it from a Caribbean specific conversation. So speaking of Caribbean specific, so Carnival is close by. So Ryan, Carnival is very, very important to a lot of islands in the Caribbean. Trinidad is one of the biggest ones. And when it comes to this fraud conversation, I feel we need to have this conversation because there's an influx of Forex, which is extremely important to the island. But in addition to that, there's a global trend that have been shifting to something called friendly fraud rise. So I would like Eldred to give us some insight, especially when we're in this space of Carnival where someone pays for something in advance, which is a costume, they will experience it, and then they leave the country, and that merchant has a responsibility there. So give us some insight, Eldred, as to what we can learn in this space.
Well, Pauline, in the spirit of keeping consistent, I'll give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So friendly fraud. Real quick, what is friendly fraud? A person with their own credit card doing a transaction and saying that it wasn't them. That's what we consider friendly fraud. It's really difficult to stop friendly fraud because it's a legitimate person doing a legitimate transaction and then just basically lying, saying, "Oh, it wasn't me," and trying to get away with getting products or services for free. However, this is where the good stuff comes in. This is where the AI, the friendly part of the AI, comes into play. Fraud prevention has evolved significantly. It used to be a very reactive kind of way. Something happened, you reacted to it, and you try to prevent it from happening again. However, now with AI, it's much more adaptive. It's in real time. It is actually looking at behavioral patterns that are happening in real time and adjusting that protection in real time. And how do we do that? By a number of different ways. One of the ways that it does it is by doing constant authentication in a transaction behind the scenes. So are you who you say you are doing what you say you're doing from a device that we recognize that belongs to you? And if that analysis, which is happening in microseconds, you're able to authenticate, you can start proceeding with that transaction. However, if any of those things change along the way, AI is doing these micro authentications along the way. And if you start doing things that seem strange, the fraud protection adjusts, and then it requires you to do an active authentication versus a passive authentication. And an active authentication is you're doing transactions that are way outside your limit or way more rapid than you're supposed to be doing. What it does, it reaches out and say, I'm going to send you a one-time password to confirm that this is you. You're going to need to verify yourself, typically either through a device that you've already registered with your financial institution or through some other means. And if we identify that, yes, you have done a transaction, you are who you say you are, and then you're trying to be a funny guy and not trying to pay for that, we'll put you in a blacklist. And I've seen this happen before with small Caribbean airlines where somebody has come in, used a legitimate card, done a transaction, bought an airplane ticket, had flown to their destination, and they say, hey, it wasn't me. The airline said, okay, it seemed like it was you. We did all the validation, and it was you. Now you're saying it's not you. Guess what? You're never going to fly with us again. And they put them in a blacklist. And guess what? When you're trying to leave a small island in a local regional airline, and you don't have a lot of choices, being put on a blacklist because you try to be a funny guy, it's not a good thing to do. When you go back, typically what happened with that scenario, they went back to the airline and said, you know what, I need to get off this blacklist. And they're going to say, that's perfectly fine, but we know you did a transaction. It was you. You're going to have to pay for that now. And you have to, in order to get put off the blacklist, you're going to have to pay for what you tried to get away with. That's easier said than done, in a small environment like the Caribbean and smaller merchants. When you get in the global scale, friendly fraud is much harder to do. But because of our markets, we do have the tools to mitigate that kind of fraud as well.
Wow, that's such an insight because it's not something you think about, especially as a passenger. You just, as an honest passenger, I think I am. You paid for something, you received it, you moved on. So what are you seeing on your end, Ryan, in this friendly fraud conversation from a global perspective?
Yeah, friendly fraud is funny because it's I think it's most prevalent that from what I see is with growing subscription businesses, or if a company is doing business as something else. So the most common is somebody sees their credit card statement, and maybe they had a extravagant dinner somewhere, and what shows up is not the name of the restaurant, it's the name of the billing group that owns maybe four restaurants. When they see that, they say, hey, this doesn't make sense to me, I don't remember this name at all, I'm going to just do a chargeback. That's friendly fraud in the broader sense, the most common form. The other one is oftentimes when they make a purchase for a subscription because they wanted whatever the free promotional, hey, join up today and we'll send you a free tote bag, or a framed picture of Eldred. I don't know. And then as soon as they get their free gift, they just charge back and say, "Yeah, I didn't sign up for this. They never told me it was a subscription." And now it's on that merchant again to refund any purchase they made and try to avoid the actually having the chargeback go through. And it's a hassle, and it's a fight often that merchants don't win because they don't know how. There's specific steps that and timelines for disputing a chargeback, and the win rate's pretty low for most individuals.
Wow, that's so interesting. And Eldred, I think you need to hire Ryan as your hype man. Really appreciating this bromance. So this is an interesting space, right? Because coming from a Caribbean perspective, which is very cash heavy, you hand over your cash, you get your service or your product, and you no longer have to deal with whatever this is afterwards. But there's now this trail that businesses have to include in their buying process. For those who may feel overwhelmed by this, Eldred, can you give us some insight as to why AI is an important part of this process?
Well, from a there's look at AI as part of your overall business strategy. You could use AI for a number of different things, right? So you can use AI to analyze transactions, identify patterns of behaviors from your merchants and their purchasing behaviors with regards to what products and services are more profitable for an organization, to determine what product mix works and which one doesn't. So if you have 10 products and one of them is just a flop, right? It's not generating anything. Get it out of the mix. Move on to what's profitable. AI can do that very quickly. If you move to a merchant's, to a customer's perspective, you can use AI to do a number of different things that we couldn't do before. Commerce is evolving very quickly. AI is part of the entire ecosystem. Imagine now a consumer being able to determine that there are certain products and services that have a fluctuation in price. You can create an artificial bot, a good bot, to say, hey, when something falls below this price, I want you to buy. And I'm going to give you the authority to go and buy on my behalf. That way you can go to sleep, prices drop, your bot has purchased. AI is very important to be able to do that. And on the flip side, from a merchant, you got to be able to determine which bots are good bots and which bots are bad bots, because the fraudsters are also doing the same thing, but they're just creating bad bots. So from an artificial intelligence perspective, this evolution in commerce is happening very quickly. And I can't stress enough how important it is to have an AI-driven fraud prevention solution deployed across a bank's entire merchant portfolio in order to leverage all these new technologies. We have proactively embedded Kount in all our solutions, because when we first started deploying technology, the number one priority was to make sure we protect the house. We protect the financial institutions, we protect the merchants, we protect ourselves, because as we deploy new technologies that have artificial intelligence, the way it is evolving, there is no way a human being can compete with artificial intelligence. You have, I really encourage people to go out and do a little bit of research on, when you're talking about commerce and the use of AI in commerce, how fast it is evolving, how AI is now purchasing on our behalf, and how we need to protect ourselves with artificial intelligence to make sure that we can identify the good from the bad.
Thanks for that, Eldred. We're going to go on a break, but I want to preempt the next session when we're come back with our speakers, because we're going to give a bit of an insight into Hollywood, because Hollywood has consistently done things wrong in terms of how we look at doctors in the series ER, how we look at social media management with Emily in Paris, and of course, how we look at hackers where someone's in a hoodie typing down with their computer. So we're going to find out a little bit more about what Kount is doing when it comes to the AI versus fraud conversation. So we will be right back. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us at the Powertranz live show. We cover all things e-commerce with guests joining us from all over the world to share their knowledge in this digital space that we all reside in. You're not going to find these conversations anywhere. Trust me, I looked for it, especially when it comes to the Caribbean. So don't forget to follow us on YouTube, smash that subscribe button so you'll learn more on how you can manage your business online. Today, we're discussing AI versus fraud, the battle for the future of payments in the Caribbean. And we're joined by Eldred and Ryan. We're going to bring them back in because we don't have much time. Just before the break, I kind of went in on the Hollywood space and what the version of fraud and AI and hackers are. Because I know everyone here who's watching the show now on the replay has seen someone in a hoodie typing away thinking that's what the version of a bot and a hacker is. So let's have this conversation as it relates to how Kount has evolved when it comes to detecting synthetic identities, because a lot of us hear about bots, chat bots, bots that are hacking. So what is Kount, an Equifax company, doing to ensure that we're protected?
Yeah, I think I like this question a lot. First of all, the thing about about fraud is that it's the people committing fraud, right, are not just committing fraud. That's not the only thing they do. They also pay their cell phone bill and do all sorts of other things. And oftentimes they're using the same devices or similar credit cards and things of their own nature. So it's not just how do we find bots and how do we stop bots. I mean, we can put up gates in different places that'll just kind of close off transactions. The trouble is we need to still allow the transactions for when fraudsters are just being people making transactions. I think that's a key piece that goes unknown to most people, is that with the amount of data and AI learning that a system like Count's payment fraud protection has, we're able to see the nuance pieces. We're not building just static rules, blacklists, and killing anybody who's done something bad. We're seeing bot attacks and we're seeing attacks from different people. We're seeing friendly fraud. We're able to differentiate these things in, like Eldred said, in a blink of an eye, in an unnoticeable amount. So it's really about learning to trust the customer journey for a merchant. So how they bring in customers, how they transact with customers, and how that continues forward. I think that's the piece here that when we're talking about the various bots to look out for, people can spin up a new bot tomorrow that behaves in a new different way. What we're able to do is, from all the data across Barclays and Chase and these different global organizations, we're able to know when the device is trustable, when the credit card belongs to the person, when the email is brand new or garbage. We can detect bots, we can detect fraudsters, and we can detect when those bots and fraudsters are making legitimate transactions. That's kind of the miracle of a tool like this, is that AI and machine learning allow us to have intelligent interactions behind the scenes with customers and merchants as they're transacting or trying to commit fraudulent transactions.
It's so interesting what you said, Ryan, about fraud isn't all they do, because this envision of someone just hacking away, sipping on Coca-Cola for 12 hours is embedded in all of our brains. So it's so interesting to have that perspective. Thank you so much for that. So I want to bring it back from a regional perspective and ask Eldred, with so many major shifts happening within the Caribbean payment space, how are merchants, how are they going to face compliance, especially with when you have to sign up your business in the banking sector? There's a running joke of, all this information you have to submit. So you have to be compliant, not only with just opening a bank account, but within the e-commerce space. So how can we as Caribbean payment merchants, what are we doing and what are you doing as Powertranz to help us?
Well, from a compliance perspective, there is an organization called PCI, and PCI basically what they do is make sure that merchants, financial institutions, anybody who touches sensitive cardholder information, manages that sensitive cardholder information to make sure that doesn't get compromised. So we've evolved significantly since PCI has come out. And and I've talked about this a number of times. Static information is bad, right? Because you get compromised, and then you can use it over and over again. We need to make sure that the information is encrypted. Encryption is not new technology. Julius Caesar used to use encryption. However, encryption has evolved significantly, and we got military grade encryption technology now, and we have tokenization. Tokenization is the substitution, if you will, of sensitive cardholder information, so you can store it and use it for later dates, reoccurring subscriptions and stuff like that. So at Powertranz, we not only do all the PCI compliance, and we have not only all the advanced technologies like advanced encryption and tokenization, and as the industry evolves and we move into network tokenizations, we move all that cardholder sensitive information further and further away from organizations that need to use it, from the financial institutions to the merchants to the gateway. So it's moving all the way up to the network. What we do specifically especially for small merchants, the burden of having to figure out how to protect this information, we just basically remove it away from them. We give them the tools in order for them to accept payments in an electronic fashion without the exposure of them having to either touch, access, or therefore get compromised that sensitive information. So we provide them solutions like a payment page that's hosted with us and not with the merchant. So when the merchant says it's time to pay and the customer goes to pay, what you're actually interacting with is not on the merchant's side, it's on our side. And that's totally encrypted, totally tokenized and protected. We are PCI service level 1 provider, and we get audited on a regular basis to make sure that all this cardholder sensitive information is taken care of. But equally important, the solutions that we put out there, we make sure that that it's protected. We have not only Kount to protect that, but we also include or embed, if you will, encryption and tokenization. So we provide the merchants and the financial institutions the tools and solutions that they need in order to grow their business, generate revenue, but in a safe way, in a way that we don't expose the merchants, whether small, medium, or large, to having cardholder information being compromised.
All right, thanks for that, Eldred. So we are closing. We're close to ending time. So we have one last question for Ryan. We're going to close off with this. What is an actionable step that Caribbean merchants can take today to future-proof their payment infrastructure against AI-powered fraud attacks?
Yeah, I think like Eldred said, the tokenizing is important. Making sure you have an adaptive AI fraud solution. Obviously, it's dear to me. Having something in place. What I've loved watching in the Caribbean specifically is that there's the barrier, right, to being able to grow using e-commerce tools. So I would check with your financial institution and make sure that they're working with Powertranz. And that's not just a plug. That's just because they have the best deployment of tools to allow businesses to grow beyond that kind of the space of it's cash in hand and expand their businesses to see how much they can really grow. With the right tools in place, these AI fraud, the bots, the different attacks that happens when you have these things, tools in place to protect you, they tend to test the waters and move on in a way that's not impactful. All your man hours then stay dedicated to growing business, creativity, networking, the things that people genuinely are good at and enjoy doing to grow a business.
Well, thank you so much for that, Ryan. And on that note, I'm seeing Howard's question on YouTube. Unfortunately, we don't have the time, but we will have someone respond to you in the comment section on YouTube. You're joining us on Caribbean time. Sorry about that, Howard. So let's thank you so much to Eldred Garcia from Powertranz and Ryan Geraghty, who is joining us from Kount and Equifax Company. And today joining. For anyone who's joining us late, not to worry, this will be available on YouTube and LinkedIn on the replay. Again, AI versus fraud is such a very, very important conversation, and the battle for the future of payments in the Caribbean is an ongoing conversation that we will surely see in 2026. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to be notified for our next Powertranz live discussion, and happy holidays to everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.